tried to describe this. It's like seeing a piece of white lint on a black dress, but most people disregard that piece of lint. They just see the dress. I always see the lint, and I'm fascinated by how did something get someplace it's not supposed to be. So it doesn't even need to be a big discrepancy, but if something shouldn't be someplace in a constellation of facts that sort of made sense in a traditional way, I've learned that if you focus on why one discordant note is there, that's usually a key to something important. And if you can find two of those discordant notes, that's usually a straight line to someplace. And that someplace is not where you've been. And usually when you figure out that things are changing or have changed, and you describe them, which you have to be able to do because it's not some odd intuition. It's just focusing on facts. It's almost like a scientific discovery, if you will. When you describe it to other people in the real world, they tend to do absolutely nothing about it. And that's because humans are comfortable in their own reality. And if there's no particular reason at that moment to shake them out of their reality, they'll stay in it, even if they're ultimately completely wrong. And I've always been stunned that when I explain where we're going, what we're doing, and why, almost everyone just says, that's interesting. And they continue doing what they're doing. And so, I think it's pretty easy to do that, but what you need is a huge data set. So, before AI and people's focus on data, I've sort of been doing this mostly my whole life. I'm not a scientist. I'm not, let alone a computer scientist. And, you can just hear what people are saying. When somebody says something or you observe something that simply doesn't make sense, that's when you really go to work. The rest of it's just processing.
So, on a quick tangent, pattern recognition is a term often used throughout the history of AI. That's the goal of artificial intelligence, is pattern recognition, right? But there's, I would say, various flavors of that. So usually pattern recognition refers to the process of the what you said, dress and the lint on the dress. Pattern recognition is very good at identifying the dress, is looking at the pattern that's always there, that's very common, and so on. You almost referred to a pattern that's like what's called outlier detection in computer science, right? The rare thing, the small thing. Now, AI is not often good at that. Just almost philosophically, the kind of decisions you made in your life, based scientifically almost on data, do you think AI in the future will be able to do? Is it something that could be put down into code, or is it still deeply human?
It's tough for me to say since I don't have domain knowledge in AI to know everything that could or might occur. I know sort of in my own case that most people don't see any of that.
Right.
I just assumed it was motivational, but it's also sort of it's hardwiring. What are you wired or programmed to be finding or looking for? It's not what happens every day. That's not interesting, frankly. I mean, that's what people mostly do. I do a bunch of that too, because that's what you do in normal life. But I've always been completely fascinated by the stuff that doesn't fit. Okay. Or the other way of thinking about it, it's determining what people want without them saying it. That's a different kind of pattern. You can see everything they're doing. There's a missing piece. They don't know it's missing. You think it's missing. given the other facts you know about them, and you deliver that, and then that becomes, sort of very easy to sell to them.
To linger on this point a little bit, you've mentioned that in your family, when you were growing up, nobody raised their voice in anger or otherwise. And you said that this allowed you to learn to listen and hear some interesting things. Can you elaborate, as you have been, on that idea? What do you hear about the world if you listen?
Well, you have to listen really intensely to understand what people are saying, as well as what people are intending, because it's not necessarily the same thing. And people mostly give themselves away, no matter how clever they think they are. Particularly if you have the full array of inputs. In other words, if you look at their face, you look at their eyes, which are the window on the soul, it's very difficult to conceal what you're thinking. You look at facial expressions and posture. You listen to their voice, which changes. When you're talking about something you're comfortable with or not, are you speaking faster? Is the amplitude of what you're saying higher? Most people just give away what's really on their mind. They're not that clever. They're busy spending their time thinking about what they're in the process of saying. And so if you just observe that, not in a hostile way, but just in an evocative way, and just let them talk for a while, they'll more or less tell you almost completely what they're thinking, even the stuff they don't want you to know. And once you know that, of course, it's sort of easy to play that kind of game because they've already told you everything you need to know. And so it's easy to get to a conclusion, if there's meant to be one, an area of common interest, since you know almost exactly what's on their mind. And so that's an enormous advantage, as opposed to just walking in someplace and somebody telling you something and you believing what they're saying. There are so many different levels of communication.
So a powerful approach to life you discuss in the book on the topic of listening and really hearing people is figuring out what the biggest problem bothering a particular individual or group is, and coming up with a solution to that problem and presenting them with the solution, right? In fact, you brilliantly describe a lot of simple things that most people just don't do. It's kind of obvious. Find the problem that's bothering somebody deeply. And as you said, I think you've implied that they will usually tell you what the problem is. But can you talk about this process of seeing what the biggest problem for a person is, trying to solve it, and maybe a particularly memorable example?
Yeah, sure. If you know you're going to meet somebody, there are two types of situations: chance meetings, and the second is you're going to meet somebody. So let's take the easiest one, which is you're going to meet somebody, and you start trying to make pretend you're them. It's really easy. What's on their mind? What are they thinking about in their daily life? What are the big problems they're facing? So if they're, to make it a really easy example, make pretend, they're like president of the United States. Doesn't have to be this president. It can be any president. So you sort of know what's more or less on their mind because the press keeps reporting it, and you see it on television. You hear it. People discuss it. So if you're going to be running into somebody in that kind of position, you sort of know what they look like already. You know what they sound like. You know what their voice is like, and you know what they're focused on. And so if you're going to meet somebody like that, what you should do is take the biggest unresolved issue that they're facing and come up with a few interesting solutions that basically haven't been out there, or that you haven't heard anybody else was thinking about. So just to give you an example, I was sort of in the early 1990s, and I was invited to something at the White House, which was a big deal for me because I was like, a person from no place, and I had met the president once before because it was President Bush, because his son was in my dormitory, so I had met him at Parents' Day. I mean, it's just like the oddity of things. So I knew I was going to see him because that's where the invitation came from. And so there was something going on, and I just thought about, 2 or 3 ways to approach that issue. And at that point, I was separated, and so I had brought a date to the White House, and so I saw the president, and we sort of went over in a corner for about 10 minutes and discussed whatever this issue was, and I later, went back to my date. It was a little rude, but it was meant to be confidential conversation, and I barely knew her. She said, "What were you talking about all that time?" And I said, "Well, there's something going on in the world, and I've thought about different ways of perhaps approaching that." And he was interested. And the answer is, of course he was interested. Why wouldn't he be interested? There didn't seem to be an easy outcome. And so, conversations of that type, once somebody knows you're really thinking about what's good for them and good for the situation, it has nothing to do with me. I mean, it's really about being in service, to the situation. Then people trust you, and they'll tell you other things because they know your motives are basically very pure. You're just trying to resolve a difficult situation or help somebody do it. So these types of things, that's a planned situation. That's easy. Sometimes you just come upon somebody and they start talking, and that requires like different skills. You can ask them, "What have you been working on lately? What are you thinking about?" You can ask them, has anything been particularly difficult? You can ask them. Most people, if they trust you for some reason, they'll tell you, and then you have to instantly go to work on it. And that's not as good as having some advanced planning, but almost everything going on is like out there, and people who are involved with interesting situations, they're playing in the same ecosystem. They just have different roles in the ecosystem, and you can do that with somebody who owns a pro football team that loses all the time. We specialize in those in New York, and you already have analyzed why they're losing, right? Inevitably, it's because they don't have a great quarterback, they don't have a great coach, and they don't have a great general manager who knows how to hire the best talent. Those are the 3 reasons why a team fails, right? Because there are salary caps, so every team pays the same amount of money for all their players. So it's got to be those 3 positions. So if you're talking with somebody like that, inevitably, even though it's not structured, you'll know how their team's doing, and you'll know pretty much why. And if you start asking questions about that, they're typically very happy to talk about it because they haven't solved that problem. In some cases, they don't even know that's the problem. It's pretty easy to see it. So, I do stuff like that, which I find is intuitive as a process, but, leads to really good results.
Well, the funny thing is, when you're smart, for smart people, it's hard to escape their own ego and the space of their own problems, which is what's required to think about other people's problems. It requires for you to let go of the fact that your own problems are all important, and then to talk about I think, while it seems obvious, and I think quite brilliant, it's a difficult leap for many people, especially smart people, to truly empathize with the problems of others.
Well, I have a competitive advantage, which
like
which is which is I don't think I'm so smart. So
good.
So it's not a problem for me.
Well, the truly smartest people I know say that exact same thing. Yeah, being humble is really useful competitive advantage, as you said. How do you stay humble?
Well, I haven't changed much
Since
since I was in my mid-teens. I was raised partly in the city and partly in the suburbs, um, and whatever the values I had at that time, those are still my values. I call them like middle class values. That's how I was raised, and I've never changed. Why would I? That's who I am, and so the accoutrement of the rest of your life has got to be put on the same like solid foundation of who you are. Because if you start losing who you really are, who are you? So I've never had the desire to be somebody else. I just do other things now that I wouldn't do as a, sort of as a middle-class kid from Philadelphia. I mean, my life has morphed on a certain level, but part of the strength of having integrity of personality is that you can remain in touch with everybody who's comes from that kind of background, and even though I do some things that aren't like that, in terms of people I'd meet or situations I'm in, I always look at it through the same lens, and that's very psychologically comfortable, and doesn't require me to make any real adjustments in my life, and I just keep